Recorded here is all right. Yeah, so I still have about another like 6 weeks of summer, but it's still feeling like summer. I feel like almost like the whole country is going through quite the heat wave at this point. Has it still been pretty warm in Ohio too, Daniel?
It's been incredibly warm. I haven't been there the past week and a half. We'll maybe get to that in a moment when we introduce ourselves, but it's been really hot this summer. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been super crazy warm. Like in the 90s, but heat index of like over 100. And I'm the kind of person where I just melt. Like I literally just cannot survive when it's that hot. So it looks beautiful outside, but I have not been going outside nearly as much as I want to because it is so warm. When it's that warm, you kind of need to be like, I think, like on or near water, at least if you're me.
My friend has a pool, and we got a chance to visit a couple times, and that does make a big difference. If you can hop in the pool and be by the water.
Absolutely. Yeah, we just came back from a lake cabin week. And we're able to spend a lot of time on the lake, which helped a lot too. But back home, not the same story. All right, here. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think probably have some more people join us as we kind of get going here in the next few minutes or so. So we'll just invite them in, but we'll go ahead and kick off with who we've got so far. So thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon to join us in our first webinar in our webinar series, Mapping Your NGSS Assessment Strategy. This webinar series is all about how to figure out what common assessment NGSS science assessment strategy may fit best with your context. And today we're going to be doing a really big deep dive into growth assessments. And then we'll have three other webinars looking at curricular benchmarks, common formative assessments, and unit assessments as well. So thank you so much for being here. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves in the chat, it's always nice to see who we have here with us. If you want to share where you're from, what you do, that would be amazing. We will have some opportunities later on during the live workshop for everybody to kind of unmute and we can have more of a discussion. But we're going to go ahead and kind of start off with more of the presentation at the beginning, and then we'll switch into more of the live workshop discussion based here shortly. But in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves in the chat, who you are, where you're from, what you do, that would be awesome. And to return the favor, Daniel and I will also introduce ourselves. So my name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her. Prior to being here at Inner Orbit, I was a high school chemistry teacher for 10 years here in Minnesota. I taught in our alternative learning program. I taught regular chem, honors chem. So lots of ways to teach a lot of different kids a lot of different ways. I worked a lot with the NGSS with my time in the classroom and now out of the classroom. And I also got to be a PLC lead and lead a lot of data-driven dialogue, which is my favorite thing to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about data here today, has got me super excited. And now I have the joy of partnering with districts to help them pilot and implement Inner Orbit. And speaking of summer, I've been able to be out on the lake a lot this summer, which is great. We've got a cabin up north, and that is by far my favorite thing to do. And Daniel, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you.
Thanks, Emily. Hey, everyone. My name is Daniel Jackson. Before joining Inner Orbit, I was a curriculum director, a high school biology and middle school science teacher, totaling about 11 years in education. I taught at an international school in Colombia, and I was a global education and Fulbright TGC scholar in Morocco. And I currently partner with school leaders and teachers who are new to Inner Orbit. And as I alluded to earlier, haven't been home in a couple of weeks. I'm on a trip still right now, visiting friends and family in Colombia, and just had a lot of chances this summer to travel around to different cities in the United States, different states to visit people. So just a really enjoyable summer getting around and seeing a lot of people that I haven't seen in a while.
Oh, that's awesome. And super jealous too. All right. So today, like I mentioned, this is our first webinar in a series of four where we're going to be talking about different common assessment strategies that you could implement. And today we're going to be talking about growth assessments in particular. Our objective today is to just explore growth assessments as a common assessment science strategy. And we're going to talk about the purpose behind them. We'll give you a real life example of growth assessments in one of our partnering school districts here at InterOrbit so you can see what it could actually look like. And then, if you've been to our webinars before, we're trying something new here. We're actually going to end with a live workshop to give you an opportunity to actually build an InterOrbit account if you don't have one and actually start exploring and building a growth assessment just so you can kind of start getting an idea of what it could look like and get some brainstorming. So we're planning to be here for about an hour. We're going to just start off briefly with what is InterOrbit in case you're unfamiliar. Then we're going to just talk about common assessment systems in general, talk about some of the benefits behind them and different ways on how to choose a strategy that will best work for you in your context. Then we're going to talk a little bit just about 3D assessments in particular, since we're talking NGSS. And then we're going to dive into the growth assessments. So we're going to provide you with a real district example, like I mentioned, that uses growth assessments. And then we're going to end with our live workshop. So we're going to actually kick off the live workshop with sharing a recent framework that we developed here for choosing priority standards. So growth assessments don't have to be centered around priority standards, but it can be a really nice starting point for how to build them. And we're going to share a framework that can be useful in helping choose what those standards could be that your growth assessment could be built around. Then, if you don't already have one, we'll get you hooked up with an InterOrbit demo account so you can jump in and start building your own example growth assessment. And this is going to be a moment of growth for you and us, and hopefully for your students as they potentially play around with growth assessments. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So like I mentioned, we're just going to quick start off with what is InterOrbit in case you're unfamiliar. InterOrbit is an assessment platform. We have over 10,000 different assessment items that are all tied to novel phenomena that you can then use to build high integrity 3D assessments that then give you meaningful and actionable student data. So I mentioned before, I love data, and our data reports give you really detailed, broken down data by SCP, CCC, DCI, so you can really dig in and figure out where you need to help and support your students to help them move forward. Another thing that we like to do here is make the NGSS accessible for both you and your students with innovative approaches to sense making. So we do this by having scaffolded questions on our site, by offering different supports and different PD and different resources to try to make this big beast that is the NGSS a little bit more accessible and being able to implement it to the best of your ability. And we do that through guidance and supporting resources and professional development, much like this webinar here, to help you reach your NGSS goals. So we run webinars like this all the time, and we also offer other PD opportunities as well. Daniel just dropped a link in the chat, which is a interest form if you're interested in potentially piloting InterOrbit for this upcoming school year. It's just an interest form letting us know that you want to learn more and see what a pilot could look like. We'll also offer this link again later on in the presentation, but if you wanted to grab that now, that's there for you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Daniel, and he's going to talk a little bit about common assessment systems in general and how you can decide what common assessment system may work best for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. All right, let's dive into common assessment systems, what they are, why they matter, and a practical way to structure them for the NGSS. So what is a common assessment? Simply put, it's the same assessment that's given by teachers who teach the same subject, the same grade level. And the real purpose isn't the test itself or just the test itself. It's also the conversation afterwards where teams look at the data together and respond to student needs. The goal is efficiency for you and also equity for the students. There are four benefits here. They are to set a clear, four benefits here, excuse me. They are to set clear, consistent expectations. They give you reliable data you can actually compare. They strengthen how your team works together. And they're a low lift way to try something new. Quick question for you all. I can drop in the chat. Which of those does your team need the most right now? And we encourage you to use the chat throughout the webinar here. And if you're feeling more of a collaborative urge, we have some time during the quick workshop at the end to engage with each other. But if you could put in the chat, out of those four, one, two, three, four, which of those do you feel your team needs the most right now? And I think they're all pretty important. It's kind of having to just choose one that maybe stands out, but obviously reading all four, they may all be pretty important to you, establishing clear and consistent learning expectations, provide reliable, comparable student data, strengthening collaboration and instructional growth, and being the low lift introduction uh, to uh, to something new. I see a two in the chat. I see two twos. So providing reliable, comparable student data, super important. A three there, strengthening collaboration and instructional growth. Awesome. We appreciate you all putting those in the chat. So for common assessments, they can come in multiple types. We have four types here. There's growth assessments, curricular benchmarks, unit assessments, and formatives. They mostly differ in scope and how often you give them. Formatives are quick and in the moment. Benchmarks and growth assessments track progress over a longer arc. It may not be necessary to have them all figured out at once. It's best to start with one based on what your district or department needs. And this flow chart here on the next slide is just a guide to help you choose an initial strategy. A lot of these approaches overlap, so I wouldn't overthink it. But the key is picking one clear vision to start with. And that's what makes implementation actually stick. Starting small with something that you know will be useful for you all and something that you see a gap in your district or in your department. And as we go through the flow chart here, you can see that we have how often would it be, excuse me, how often would it be most helpful to receive data? You have three options: as frequently as possible, every unit, a few times a year. As you're going through that flow chart, you can make the next choice of these questions. What do you need this data to tell you the most? What do you need this data to tell you the most for each one, excuse me? And then you have two options for each of those. Are you looking for the teachers to be aligned, students improving over time? And as you go through the flow chart, you may end up with a specific type of assessment. We have unit assessments, common formative, and for this one, we are going to go over the growth assessments. All right, so that's the foundation. Now let's get into what actually makes a science assessment strong, and that means talking about the three-dimensional assessments. The NGSS assessment is built on three dimensions, as you all may know: the DCI, or the core content, the disciplinary core ideas. The CCCs are cross-cutting concepts that show up across all of science. The SEPs are the practices, what students are actually doing as scientists. And the whole point of the 3D is that students aren't just recalling facts. They're using practices and concepts together to make sense of phenomena. And this is where Inner Orbit comes in. We scaffold sense making by building questions at 1, 2, and 3 dimensions. So you can dial up the rigor or dial it down if needed. You may start lighter for a diagnostic or build all the way up to a full 3D for a summative. And it lets you meet students where they're at and scaffold them towards real sense making. I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who will explore growth assessments as a common assessment strategy.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. So now that we've got a little bit of an understanding of just common assessments in general, the benefits they can have, and an idea for how to pick what would be best for you in your context right now, we're going to do a deep dive into one of those options, which is growth assessments. So growth assessments are the same summative assessment given more than once, at least once before instruction and then again after instruction, or as the instruction is currently happening. So the purpose behind this is to measure student growth on specific prioritized performance expectations over time. And you can call these like student learning or growth objectives, pre-post, benchmarks. You can really call these whatever you want them to. This could look like a beginning of year, mid-year, end of year assessment that's going to be focusing on key standards. Now, the reason why we specifically call these growth assessments versus like a benchmark or anything like that is the fact that this is the same assessment that is given more than once. So you're giving identical assessments. And the true benefit with that is that you can really then compare apples to apples. So you can see how students did initially, and then after instruction or after time goes by, you can assess again on that same assessment and see if any growth has happened. Therefore, growth assessments. So when we're kind of looking back to this flow chart, the reason why growth assessments kind of lands here is growth assessments are a really great opportunity if you have limitations for giving common assessments within your context. Let's say there's a lack of PLC time, or you've got a really large team that you're working with, like 15 plus school sites, and it's just going to be hard to get everybody on the same page right away. If you initially just give this assessment a few times a year, it's a little bit of an easier from a logistics standpoint in order to implement the system. The other thing that's really nice is you only need to build one assessment. So if you have a team of teachers who's building assessment, or if it would just be you building this assessment, only putting one on your plate, again, is a lot more manageable when you're starting out with a common assessment system. The other thing that's really nice, like I mentioned, is you're really able to compare apples to apples. This is one of the most reliable ways to measure student growth over time because you're really looking at how do they do with this question like at the beginning of the year, and then how did they handle this same three-dimensional question at the end of the year? And then it can really help you track towards that proficiency as well. They're also really useful because they don't necessarily need to be given at the exact same time. For example, if you're doing like a unit assessment, like an end of unit or end of semester, you really need to coordinate when that is being taken because you need to make sure everybody's at the same point in their scope and sequence. But with growth benchmarks, if you're kind of doing beginning, middle, or end of year, or just beginning and end, you don't necessarily need to coordinate like this is the day, this is the time. There's a little bit more flexibility, which again can be helpful depending on what your context and what your system looks like. So if that sounds something like familiar to you or similar to what you're currently dealing with, growth assessments could be a really nice place to start off. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually do a real district deep dive. So this is a district that uses InterOrbit to administer growth assessments throughout the year. So you can actually get an idea and a picture of what this could look like. So this is a large district, so over 15,000 students, and it's in the suburb of Oklahoma. And like I mentioned, they do growth benchmarks and they do them beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year. So they give it 3 times. The need that drove these growth assessments is they really needed reliable snapshots of proficiency. So they wanted to know, okay, where are our students at with these set of standards? And then how are our students progressing over time on this very specific set of standards? Like I mentioned, since they're giving that exact same assessment, they're able to track that sense making over time, which for them, their ultimate goal was state test prep. So they wanted to make sure that their students were ready for their state science test exam. So this was a way for them to track if students were getting more proficient with certain standards before that deadline. And then it was really nice for them to identify gaps in 3D data to then make targeted instructional next steps. So if that beginning of year growth assessment was initially showing a gap in a certain SCP, they were able to identify that at the beginning of the year, and then they could do targeted instructional support throughout the year on what was identified right at the beginning. So this is kind of what it looked like within InterOrbit for them. So like I said, they had their beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year. And then they had it for different grade levels, for different content areas built for that school year. So just to kind of give you an idea of what this looked like. So we're looking at a 7th grade science benchmark. So this was given to all of the 7th graders within this school district. So this first one here was given at the beginning of the year, and it had about a 41% average. The numbers that you're seeing here, these are cut scores. So this district chose to do 65%, 50%, 40%, and then 5%. So 75 students scored 65% or above. So that's what those numbers mean. So then they gave this exact same assessment. So identical assessment was then given at the middle of the year, and they saw growth. So we saw a shift not only in the overall average, but you can also see a shift in how individual students did, increasing their percentage over time. And then again, they gave the exact same assessment again at the end of the year. And again, we're able to track and measure that growth. To give you a little bit more details on what this assessment was, so like I said, it was the same assessment. It was 39 questions, and they chose about 16 performance expectations or 16 standards, and they did about 3 questions-ish per PE. And for the most part, they picked 2D and 3D questions. So if you remember earlier, those 2D and 3D questions incorporate the DCI. The 2D either incorporates the SEP or CCC, or 3D incorporates all of them. And they did this to kind of mimic their state test length and structure. So they wanted it a little bit longer, and they wanted the 2D and 3D questions. So one, students were kind of getting exposure to what their state science test was looking like, and were able to kind of build up that stamina and that understanding. While at the same time, they were able to get really detailed data on how students were doing. I wanted to give you a little bit more of a detailed snapshot on what these questions actually looked like. So I mentioned this at the beginning, but all of our questions are phenomena based. So students are always going to be given some sort of novel phenomena that they need to read about and reference in order to answer the questions. So one of the phenomena within that 7th grade benchmark was, how did this marsupial play possum with New Zealand populations? This was assessing the standard MS-ELIS 2-4. So if you remember, this was 7th grade. So we're looking at a middle school life science standard here. And this was the 2-dimensional CCC question that was tied to this PE and then tied to MS-ELIS 2-4. So this is all about stability and change. So asking about if the possums eat and destroy native trees, how is that going to make a change over time? Then they had to engage in argument from evidence. So they had to actually look at the data figures. And then the third one, our 3D sense making, has them incorporating all 3 of those dimensions at the same time. So it was a 39 question assessment. This was 3 of them, focusing on one standard, lumped in with this phenomena cluster. So on this assessment, there would be multiple chunks like this. So multiple phenomena with a few questions covering a standard for students to take. And now let's take a look at the data that they got as a result. So like I mentioned, our data reports allow you to really drill down into specifics in terms of SEPs, CCCs, and DCIs. So this first snapshot that I'm showing you here is how students did on the 5 SEPs that were covered in that benchmark. And then we can see how students did at the middle of year, and then we can see how students did at the end of year. And as you can see, there were growth and gains made in every single one of these SEPs over time. And maybe this was because they looked at this initial data and decided, okay, where do we want to put our energy? Where do we want to put our focus? Where do we want to see the most growth? Or you can even look at that end of year data and say, okay, it looks like asking questions and defining problems still over the course of the year was difficult for our students. Maybe this is something we really want to look at improving for next year. So you're able to monitor that progress, you're able to identify gaps, you can connect instruction to student sense making, so really seeing what you're doing in the classroom, if it's having an impact on students' ability to sense make. And then as from a leader perspective, then you can really help coach your schools and give them those next step scaffolds to really make sure that they can help make those improvements over time as well. And while the data is fun, it's always nice to know too what the other impact is this outside of the data. So from this district, when asking teachers, a lot of them felt a greater confidence in adjusting instruction. So once they got that data, they felt more compelled in terms of like, oh, okay, so I need to switch my instruction in this way in order to help support students. They had sharper, more targeted supports, and it really helped focus their PLC conversations. When you have that common, reliable data, which is one of those benefits we mentioned, it's really then easy to bring everybody together to talk about the same thing. A quote from one of the teachers was that inner orbit really does help them acquire in the moment data to really assess where their student is and then give them the tools or the knowledge that they need to feel successful. And then what they saw from students is students knew what to expect, which, especially when it comes to the state science test, is a huge deal. So they knew what to expect, they knew what was coming. They were able to give more targeted supports with that small group flex time, and then they had growing confidence dealing with novel phenomena based questions, which, again, if you've been working with the NGSS for a while, can be a really big leap for a lot of students. In fact, one of the teachers heard their students say, "Wait, this is like that spider gift from the assessment, the one that jumps out of the hole." So they were actually able to start making connections from a phenomena they saw within an assessment to what they were doing in class, which really, like, that's it. Right? Like, that's the money right there and what we're in terms of what we're trying to do. All right. So what we've done is we just did a deep dive into growth assessments and a deep dive into a district example. And now we're going to be shifting into our live workshop where you're actually going to have a chance to build your own growth assessment. So this would be a time, if you're willing and if you're comfortable, if you want to turn on your camera, if you've got questions, if you want to unmute, if we want to make this more discussion based. I would also love to open the floor if any of you have any questions about this deep dive district example that I can try to answer for you. I know how helpful it can be to see it in action, and I know I wasn't able to cover every little detail. So if there are some additional questions on the district example, I would be happy to answer them. And then also, while we go into this live workshop portion, please feel free to unmute and ask questions so you can get what you need out of this experience as well. So I'll just go ahead and give a moment and give an opportunity for anybody to ask questions if they have them. And if not, we'll go ahead and dive into the workshop and just know that the floor is open if you want to jump in at any point. All right, we've got a question in the chat from Amy. In the Oklahoma example, how long did it take for students to take a 39 question assessment? That's a fabulous question that, if I'm being honest, I don't have the answer to. My guess would be at least a class period. Um, I think their middle school runs on like a 6 or 7 period day. So I would say, I would imagine at least one class period um, for them to be able to take that. So that is going to be a big ask on the teacher's end in terms of like a day will need to be dedicated probably for this lengthy assessment to be taken at least 3 times a year. But then on the back end, all the rich data you get as a result can really help with a lot of next steps, but that is a lot of instructional time to ask too. Yeah, absolutely. And I can try to get a better answer for you too. I can actually just dig into the account and get the data. I'll do that and I'll let you know. All right. If other questions come up, please feel free to ask them. You're also welcome to turn on your camera and unmute as well. But let's go ahead and dive into the workshop. So just to cover again, what we're hoping to do during this workshop is first, we're going to actually share a framework for choosing priority standards. This can be used with state science test data or without. So we know that summer is a big time where everybody gets their results back. So you can use your results to help you with this framework or not. And while growth assessments don't need to be built with priority standards, it can really help focus where you can make that first big initial impact. Because as you know, there's hundreds of NGSS standards. And so you can't necessarily tackle all of them at the same time. So this framework can help you narrow down, okay, which ones am I really going to focus on and give this instructional time and energy and data for? So we're going to talk about that first. And then after that, we're going to give you an opportunity to make an InterOrbit demo account if you don't already have an InterOrbit account. And this will be good for 1 month. So you'll be able to make it today, and then it'll be live for an entire month for you to play around with and poke around with, just to kind of explore. And then we'll go and start building an assessment. So I'll give you all a guided walkthrough on how to explore InterOrbit and start building assessments and some steps you could take to actually build that growth assessment. So let's go ahead and start with that framework for choosing priority standards. So this is a 5-question framework to help you narrow down some priority standards for you to then build a growth assessment around. So this is assuming you have your state science test results. If you don't, you can probably just anecdotally answer this. But the first thing that you would want to do is ask yourself what grade level bands need more support. If you're about to launch a common assessment system, maybe the bandwidth isn't there to launch it for every single grade, like 3 through 12. So if the bandwidth isn't there to do it for every single grade level right away, ask yourself which grade level band or bands do I really need to put my initial energy with first? Is it high school, middle school, elementary, etc.? And if you've got your state test results, you can see which grade level band is maybe underperforming initially to try to give some help with first. Then from there, you could look at content area. So you can look and see life science, physical science, earth and space science, and see if there's a particular area that needs more support. A lot of state tests will break down by the content area, so you can see if there's a certain one that has a lower proficiency. If you're really lucky, your state might even give you results by SCP. So some states actually will bundle SCPs together like as a skill set and will say give the proficiency of how students are doing within a skill set. So if your state does that, that's awesome, but I'll admit not a lot of them do it. Now here's where the really big useful tool comes in. Once you've narrowed down your grade level band and once you've narrowed down your content area, the next question to ask is, what SEP or CCCs are the most common within that grade level band or content area? And I've got a cheat sheet that Daniel's going to drop in the chat here in a minute for you all to check out what I mean by this. And then from there, you can find what performance expectations or standards then have those common SEPs and CCCs. So here's what I mean by this. Once you've focused on a grade level band or a content area that you're like, okay, we are going to focus here. We want to build a growth assessment. We want to like track proficiency for this grade level. Now we need to pick some priority standards that we are going to track. Let's say you're focusing on elementary. So first of all, what we have here, and Daniel just dropped the link in the chat as well. This is a little cheat sheet that shows you how frequently certain SEPs and CCCs pop up in 3rd through 5th grade. The reason we start at 3rd grade is a lot of tested material, like let's say like 5th graders. 5th grade is a common testing grade, and they usually look at standards from 5th, 4th, and 3rd. So that's usually where they start pulling information from for students to be tested on. So as you can see here, developing and using models pops up in 8 of the standards. Engaging an argument from evidence pops up in 8 of them. Cause and effect pops up in 14. So right here, you can kind of get an idea of what's going to be covered more frequently. And then you can dive even deeper. And let's say you specifically want to focus on 5th grade. Once we're looking at 5th grade, then we can go ahead and ask ourselves, what performance expectations have these common SCPs and CCCs? So at the top of the list here, we have engaging an argument from evidence with 3 standards and cause and effect with 5. Also, analyzing, interpreting data and patterns is the same. So like that could be your next chunk, if you will. But what you can do with this is once you know, okay, I really want to focus on engaging an argument from evidence and cause and effect, because that's going to come up the most frequently. What you can then do is what standards have that SEP and CCC in them? So for example, 5PS21 has engaging an argument from evidence and cause and effect. So if I were building a growth assessment and I wanted to track proficiency on standards, if I pick this as one of the standards, I'm also tracking proficiency on a common SCP, and I'm also tracking proficiency on a common CCC. Think of it as like a biggest bang for your buck standard to then prioritize and get data around. Now, there's not going to be a lot of PEs that'll like hit perfectly the most common SCP and CCC, but again, you can at least choose one of them, and this can be a really solid starting point if you don't even know where you want to initially put your energy and effort in terms of what standards are we going to assess and focus on. I've got one other example for you. And then if there's any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, unmute. We would love to hear them. So another example for you is, let's say you're looking at high school. So again, this is all of the high school PEs, grades 9 through 12. But once you're in high school, it's not necessarily by grade level anymore, it's by content area. So let's say you want to focus on high school, but specifically high school life science. Biology is a really common tested content area at that high school level in a lot of different states. So that could be a really great area to initially put some focus on. And again, the question you would ask yourself is, what PEs have those common SEPs and CCCs? While 6 of the life science high school PEs have constructing explanations and designing solutions, and 7 of them have cause and effect. So then I can go ahead and look at the standards and ask myself, well, is there one with constructing explanations and designing solutions and cause and effect? Yes. HSL is 4-4. So again, not only are you tracking proficiency on this particular standard, you're also tracking proficiency on a really common SCP, and you're tracking proficiency on a really common CCC. So you're getting that biggest bang for your buck in terms of giving that like targeted instructional support and data, because that's something that they're going to be doing a lot in high school life science. And state tests tend to reflect the frequency of SEPs and CCCs. So what I mean by that is, if they're going to build a state science test all about high school life science, and a lot of standards have constructing explanations and designing solutions and cause and effect, there's probably going to be more questions on that state science test about constructing explanations and designing solutions and cause and effect. Now, is that like a perfect, like one-to-one, like correlation? Not necessarily, but there's probably not going to be like 5 questions on asking questions and defining problems when there's just one standard that has that SCP on it. So again, it's a place to initially give yourself some focus when you're doing this. Before we actually dive into doing the demo account and you all actually exploring, are there any questions on this framework or any questions on the resource that Daniel dropped in the chat looking at these frequent SEPs or CCCs? If there's no questions, that's fine. If any come up, like I said, thank you, Courtney. Please feel free to drop them in the chat. Please feel free to unmute, turn on your video. We would love to hear them, even if they're just like curiosity questions. All right, so now is the fun part. Sorry, all of this has been fun. Now here's like the most of the fun. We're going to give you an opportunity to create a 1-month free demo account. So Daniel is going to drop in the chat a link that will bring you to this title screen right here, where it's going to say create your teacher account. If you have a Google, like a Gmail email, excuse me, not even Gmail. Like if your school district uses Google or Gmail, you can just hit this continue with Google button. If you use something else, you can create your own email and create a password, that's fine. But if you're able to use Google, I'd recommend doing that. So once you hit this continue with Google button, you are going to be brought to the home build page, which is where I'm going to start showing you all how you can start navigating the site to build your growth assessment. If you already have an InterOrbit account, if you are already a customer or piloting or anything like that, you can just go ahead and log into the account that you already have. No need to make a new one. But if you don't have one, here's your chance to get your free 1 month demo account to go ahead and explore. And once you do that, you should be brought to a screen that looks like this. I'm going to do my teacher wait time for a minute just to make sure everybody has their opportunity to log in and get on. If you're having any issues, please let us know. If you want to give a thumbs up emoji or say I'm in the chat, you can do that. I just don't want to like cruise too fast before everybody's got a chance to make their account and get in. All right, awesome. Thank you, Amy. And if you're having any issues getting logged in, please feel free to let us know. We'd be more than happy to help. Awesome. Thank you, Susanna. All right. All right, let's go ahead and get cooking with. If you're still logging in, by all means, please continue to do so. And if you need help, let us know. All right. So once you're on this main build page, so let's say you just went through that framework. Okay. And let's say you're like, all right, I know that HSLS 4.4, that's my standard. Like I need to pick that one as a focus area. You are able to just type in HSLS 4.4. If you already know exactly where you want to go, you can type that into the search bar and you will go ahead and see what we have available for that standard. You're going to see pre-made assessments up here. So we have pre-made diagnostics, pre-made summatives, pre-made formatives. If I were to build a growth assessment personally, I would maybe look into the different phenomena clusters a little bit. So for example, let's go ahead and look at this mice one. So this would be the phenomena that students would be given in order to answer the questions. And then down here, you can see all of the questions that we have available for that phenomenon. So again, I'm going to do this in the lens of making a growth assessment. So if I were to make a growth assessment, I probably would not want to do any of these prior knowledge one-dimensional questions. This prior knowledge one-dimensional question, it's called prior knowledge because it's actually referencing middle school content. This is great for like as a teacher, like a little pre-unit check, like, hey, do we need to review anything, etc. But if your goal is to measure student growth on like set standards, you probably don't need to ask about one-dimensional prior knowledge questions. I would also probably stray away from one-dimensional DCI questions as well. These one-dimensional core content questions are just assessing the DCI. So these are just looking at content. These are just looking at facts. These are very recall based. And in terms of proficiency towards a standard, proficiency towards sense making, proficiency towards a state test, one-dimensional questions aren't going to give you a lot of intel in terms of how students are doing, which is why I would focus on two-dimensional questions. So this is two-dimensional with the cross-cutting concept. This is two-dimensional with the science and engineering practice. And then the purple ones are three-dimensional and have everything. We do have short answer questions. These will have to be teacher graded. So, in terms of a growth assessment, and you want to have comparable, reliable data, if you're having teachers self grade, that might be something that you would want to take into account for when looking at the data. Now, depending on your goals, depending on what you're looking for, go for it. Obviously, we know how incredibly valuable it is for students to actually write out their thoughts and responses, but it's just something to consider when you're looking at the data and what you want to look at. Maybe you want to have teachers have a PLC conversation around how they graded the question and what they saw in the student answers. But these are all just things to consider. If you see a question that you like, you simply have to hit this green Add to Quiz button. And now over here, I'm building my assessment. So I can go back over to the mouse and I'm going to go ahead and pick a 2D CCC question and a 2D SCP question. So I have a 2D CCC, a 2D SCP, and a 3D, all about the mice and all about HSLS 44. Now, the reason why I would pick 2Ds and 3Ds and not just go all the way into the 3D bucket is because of the data insights this will give you. Because let's say students do really well on the 2D CCC question, and then they do really poorly on the 2D SEP question, and they are mid. I'm sorry, I said mid. They're mid on like the 3D sense making question. Now, if everything is 3D, you don't really know what about the 3D question was hard. But if you give them 2D questions, well, if the 2D CCC question went really well and the 2D SCP question didn't, they might need more help with the SCP rather than the CCC. So this essentially will just give you more like detailed insights into what might need more support. I've done a lot of talking. Have any questions come up with this initial building a growth assessment, like initially poking around the demo account at all? Great. Courtney asked, you answered my question. Is there a recommended formula on how many 1D, 2D, and 3D questions teachers ask on assessment, or does it just depend on the phenomena used? Exactly. So again, it ultimately depends on your goal. But if you're looking for something more summative and tracking towards proficiency, I would do 2D and 3D, one of each 2D and then a 3D is what I would do. The other assessment we're going to talk about in this webinar series is common formative assessments. And that's when we recommend using 1D questions because formatives are mid-instruction and are supposed to give you a snapshot of right now. So sometimes that's nice to get like that information right now if you need to review content. But if we're looking for mastery, it's usually nice to kind of skip those ones. All right. So I added 3 HSLS 44 questions. Yay. Now let's say I want to add more. So you can keep typing in this search engine up here. So we can now go like HSLS23, for example, if I know that's my next one. And I can go through here and grab a phenomena and start building. Let's say you're unsure of what standards you want. You could start clicking through these tiles here as well. So you could go greater course, we could go high school, we could click life science, and now I've got HSLS1, HSLS2, 3, 4. Ooh, I don't have any molecules or organisms questions yet. Let's go ahead and go into here. And then you can go ahead and read through the different standards. Oh, I definitely think I want some photosynthesis questions in here, so I'm going to click that. And now I'm looking at some more phenomena for HSLS16. So you can browse through these tiles. So just for the sake of doing it, let's do some sugar-free diet drainer batteries questions. And again, I would go for a 2D CCC, a 2D SCP, and then a 3D. And I would actually read the question and make sure you like the question and not just blindly pick. But for the sake of this time, I'm just blindly picking some questions. Now, let's say, again, you're not sure really where to start. We do have this curricula button here. So let's say you use OpenSciEd and you are still looking at high school. You could click their biology and earth space. And maybe there's like a unit in here that you really want to focus on, or you want to make sure that you're pulling standards that are covered in each unit. Like you want to make sure you pick some that are in the first unit and some in the second. You can also click through these tiles as well and see what standards are taught in which unit and make sure that you're grabbing those there as well. So, a lot of different ways to navigate in order to find your questions and your phenomena. Either just typing them in, searching through the tiles, searching through the curricula. Are there any questions on how to search for standards or questions or phenomena before I show you how you would actually make it a growth assessment, like logistically on the platform? All right. So let's say you're cooking over here, you're building your assessment. Let's just add one more for the fun of it. We'll go life science again. We didn't do anything on genes, on DNA. Let's grab some here. So I'm going to grab a few more, and then I'm happy with what I've built. You can always go back and edit, so you don't have to like commit in this moment. But if you're initially happy with what you're building, you can go ahead and hit this save button. You can name it growth assessment, high school life science. And then after you save it, it's going to go into your library. So up at the very tippy top tab over here, I've got my library button. So if I click the library button, you'll see I've got my growth assessment, HSLS, already here and built and ready to go. Now, remember, the key thing with growth assessments is it's the exact same assessment given multiple times throughout the year. So rather than building this again, what you can do is you can click the little three dots next to the assessment and you can click make a copy to modify. So we can make a copy, and maybe I'm going to call this middle of year growth assessment, HSLS. And now, boom, I have two of this assessment. So maybe I'll rename this one beginning of year. But now I'm starting to build out my assessments here. So then I would assign this one to my classes, and then they would all take the beginning of year one. I could then look at the data for the beginning of year one, and then later on in the year, then I would assign the middle of year. You can build this folder structure up here to help keep it nice and organized. If you are an administrator and you want to build the assessments and like share these out with your teachers, you can lock them until you're ready for them to be opened up for teachers to then grab and then assign to their students too. But this is what it would look like on the back end is you'd build that assessment, make copies of it, give them all slightly different names, and then administer them differently. And this is where I was mentioning you can always edit this quiz. So if you click edit quiz down here, it brings you right back to where we were before. And this is where you can go ahead and click around. Let's say you don't like this question anymore, get rid of it, and then you can add new ones if you need to. We are nearing the end of our time, and Daniel and I have a few other things we would like to send you off with. All right, we got a question here. Can we also lock the phenomena and associated questions that are used on growth assessments so those questions cannot be used on any other assessments? That's a fabulous question. Yes. So if you choose to move forward with InterOrbit, we would work with you on the back end. So like once you build your growth assessment and you're like, this is it, what we can then do is we can remove those questions and phenomena for teachers if they want to just use it as in-class practice. And what you're enabling by that is making sure that you're not having like a teacher like go over one of the questions in depth because it was a classroom discussion and then it shows up on the assessment and then skews the data. So it just ensures that students are getting that unique experience of seeing that question without having seen it before. But yes, we are definitely able to do that. Of course. Are there any other initial questions before we wrap up here? All right. If those questions come up, please feel free to keep typing them in. I just wanted a quick review. So that in order to build that growth assessment, there's multiple ways you can search on the site for different PEs. Then you can go ahead and choose your 2D and your 3D questions, and then you create a copy of that assessment in order to have that exact same assessment that you can then administer multiple times. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Daniel to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. All right, everyone. That's a wrap. We covered the why behind common assessments, the 3D structure for NGSS, and you all began building a growth assessment in InterOrbit. And this is just the first in the series. Be sure to attend the others. We have curricular benchmarks on August 4th, common formative assessments on August 11th, and unit assessments on August 18th. The link to register for the upcoming sessions, I'm going to send in the chat for you all. And remember, if you can't make it, still register, and we will follow up with the recording of the session for you. And if you want to take the next steps, the interest form will be sent in the chat in just a moment. And now that you've seen how it works, we'd love to get you all piloting. I'll send the interest form link there. You all can subscribe to our YouTube channel at InterOrbit NGSS for more information, and reach out to us anytime at inquiries@interorbit.com. Emily and I will stick around for just a few more minutes in case anyone has any other questions. And we thank you all so much for spending time with us today.
Yeah, just to echo what Daniel said, thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun. Again, that pilot interest form is exactly what it sounds like. It's an interest form. So it lets us know that you're interested in actually trying this out, like either like within your school, your classroom, etc., to see what this could potentially look like for all of you. So you can go ahead and fill that out, and then one of us would be reaching out to you shortly after just to answer any questions you have and to start the conversation. And again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. And we'll stick around for a couple more minutes, but otherwise, have a fabulous rest of your day.